Welcome to everyone who's joined the South African Chamber of Commerce and the Black Empowerment Institute, and appreciate you spending some time with us. I understand we've got quite a few people that have joined us today. This is obviously a topic of extreme importance to everybody. I'm Sharon Constanson. I am chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce and have engaged in a series of these webinars of very specific interest in each of the sessions that we will be running. So I thank you really very much for being with us here today. What I would like, though, is to introduce my better half for today, which is Arlene. Arlene is a very energetic lady who makes sure that absolutely everything happens that should. She's extremely competent at her role, which is as Associate Membership Executive of the BEE Chamber. I did say Institute earlier. I do apologize, Arlene, for giving you an identity crisis. She provides members with guidance and development support and effectively to drive her BEE strategy. But also what she does is she's very strong in partnerships and working out how to work with others and to share the knowledge of the Chamber with as wider audience as possible. It's her initiative that has brought this to all of you, and we feel that for South Africans or companies that are investing into South Africa, this is a highly critical topic. Most often it is seen as a negative and is seen as a barrier. Our two panelists are going to be sharing today for you how it actually can be a business enabler and actually something to embrace it with a positive attitude, and how it will support you thereafter. So we're looking forward to hearing from our panelists, not from me. I'll pick up in question time later. Arlene, I'm going to hand over to you before we discuss and introduce our panel.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you for the introduction. So like Sharon explained, my name is Arlene Wilson-Max, and I am an executive at the BEE Chamber. We're similar to the SA Chamber UK, where they offer services and benefits to their members. The services and benefits we offer to our members are specifically related to the legislation within the BBBE Act, as well as the interpretation of that legislation. We also offer support services that are linked to how to maximize the points, your BE points. So I'm going to quickly play a short video, which will explain a little bit about why BBBE was created in South Africa.
In 2010, the National Development Plan set a goal to increase the employment rate from 13.6 million to 24 million people by 2030. The number of individuals employed needs to increase by 9 million between now and 2030. Then BEE was introduced in 2007 to secure contributions from government and business towards economic growth, enabling inclusion of more South African citizens to address unemployment and alleviate poverty. If the National Development Plan and BEE was designed to grow the GDP and create jobs, then why has unemployment increased after their introduction? Our population has grown from 41 million in 1994 to 60 million people today. In that time, the number of employed South Africans has also grown by 6 million, from 8.9 million to 15 million, representing a growth in employment rate from 20% to 28.5%. However, the unemployment rate has increased over the same period, from 22% to 32.6%, because population growth has outperformed job creation by a factor of 3 times. What this means is that South Africa's population growth has outperformed the country's job creation. The distribution of unemployment remains highly racially skewed, with white unemployment sitting at only 8.8%, which is on par with France and is lower than Italy and Brazil. Whereas the South African Indian unemployment rate is 11.8, Coloured 25.7, and African 36.5, making African unemployment the 7th highest in the world. The exceptionally high unemployment rates for Indian, Coloured, and especially African men and women is the reason for Black economic empowerment in South Africa, and the reason for the objective of the BEE Act being meaningful participation in the mainstream economy for Black people. Join the BEE Chamber today to understand more about the original intent behind BEE and how you can align your business targets and plans to contribute as a good corporate citizen and to achieve a level of pride from your corporate contributions. As a member, you will access up-to-date information, support, guidance, services, software and training to support your transformation journey.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. I'm busy saying thank you very much for watching our video. And we will be running a poll at the end of the session today. And I know a lot of you are very busy, but you have allocated at least an hour to the space for today's session. Sharon, I'd like to hand back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I have to say some of the stats in that video are quite enlightening. The one being, for me, always knowing South Africa's population being somewhere around about 40 million. Okay, maybe it's getting close to 50. And now you actually see the population is over 60 million. So in something like 40 years, you've seen a third increase in our population. And we begin to wonder why we have the kind of problems that we have, because your growth rates are probably demographically skewed to the same rates as our unemployment demographics are. So one of the things we need to do is talk about how we're going to rebalance that. So the first person who we're going to be talking to today is Unil Padiachi. I'd like to introduce him, please, as the Member Support Executive at the BEE Chamber. Before, he was Accreditation Manager at the B-BBEE program at South African National Accreditation System. And before that, he's been involved in Policy Units, Department of Trade and Industry, and he's been responsible for drafting some of the original legislation and played a key role in establishing youth employment services as well. The YES program, which, believe it or not, as a chamber we ran, one of the executives from the YES program was on a webinar of ours yesterday. So Unil has a deep experience on the development policy side, but equally now, how do you, in the corporate world, take this from applying it in a practical and positive manner for your business? We were talking this morning about corporate governance in a completely different forum, and everyone said it's a cost, it's a cost, it's a cost. Doing bad business is a cost. Doing business efficiently is not a cost. So Unil, on that basis, I'm going to hand over to you for about 15 minutes. Unil, all yours.
So thank you so much again, and welcome to everyone that's joining our session today. Pretty excited to be here, and I've only got 15 minutes to run through my presentation. And I just want to share some insights regarding, the overview of BEE, as well as just give you a high-level introduction to broad-based Black economic empowerment, as well as touch on a few key areas to consider when walking this journey. So the type of discussion points that we are going to be covering is why BEE legislation? How does this fit into the bigger picture within the South African economy? Why do we have such a piece of legislation in place? We're going to touch on some of the key legislative frameworks that is in existence from a BEE perspective. There's quite a lot out there in the market in respect of what has an impact from a BEE perspective. You need to then obviously be aware of all those pieces of legislation. Going to touch on a few of the institutions, what their roles are within the context of South Africa, as well as the definition of Black people. Always important to understand your beneficiary base from a BEE perspective, as well as looking at a general overview of the BEE scorecard. And then I want to share one very key important point that we at the BEE Chamber live by, the concept of transactional versus transformational BEE, something that we discuss probably every day with our members, trying to reinforce this message between transactional versus transformational BEE, and then just touching on a few barriers and drivers to transformation and benefits of BEE itself, just to share some insight of how entities can leverage of the BEE legislation, as well as look at that ROI component. All right. So first topic of today, Why BEE legislation? The first point I can highlight here, government's main tool in terms of driving an inclusive economy. As we can identify, the majority of the population in South Africa are African Indian, colored South African citizens, and we need to get these individuals into the workforce. We need to get them a part of, the economy, either through employment or even through starting their own business. So they need to form part of this bigger picture within the South African context. Addressing inequalities of our past, so the concept of redress. So South Africa is quite rich in history in respect of how we've come about to where we are today in respect of equality, as well as access to opportunities for different race groups. We come out of a system of apartheid that we are still trying to look at addressing, trying to change the playing field in terms of access to economy as well as opportunities. This is one of the reasons why we have such a piece of legislation in place, try to change and shift that dynamic. Reducing unemployment with a specific focus on Black youth. You could see through the video that Arlene has played, we've got a massive problem around the concept of unemployment, and specifically, focusing on our youth of today. One of the key initiatives that even Sharon mentioned just now is the Youth Employment Service Initiative. How companies can, partner with this program, leverage off the BEE legislation, and also look at a few tax rebates that come through this program. Definitely a way of, addressing unemployment, but also benefit to the business at the end of the day. Economic growth by meaningful participation of Black people. So while we've got the piece of legislation in place, again, trying to shift those individuals into a position of working or starting their own business, generating income, being a part of the bigger picture and the economy. Upskilling of individuals with the specific focus on Black people. Now that touches on one of the key elements under the scorecard, which is skills development, looks at how best we can upskill individuals through multiple training initiatives, whether it will be studying for a bursary, or being a part of a learnership, internship, apprenticeship program. All of these mechanisms feed into upskilling of these individuals. Creating new supply lines with a specific focus on Black-owned businesses. That is looking at your ESG element, how we can build a supply chain that is going to be sustainable for our future. And this touches on your preferential procurement element, your enterprise and supply development elements, looking at ways we can get more Black-owned businesses being a part of, the larger supply chains within the South African context. And there's always a focus on Black women in terms of the BEE legislation. If we look at the, during the apartheid regime, yes, there was segregation regarding, different race groups, but even with females at that point in time of a African Indian or colored nature, they were even further segregated away from access to economic activities. So that's why the scorecard also then brings in certain point indicators for Black women under areas of ownership, management control, as well as other areas in the scorecard. Implementation of investment programs that lead to broad-based and meaningful participation in the economy by Black people. So that looks at a range of programs of how best can we assist those individuals that are in communities and areas that do not even have access to our general needs or general sort of facilities. This is where you come and you'll be able to invest in those certain areas to obviously create some sort of economic activity for those individuals. So just giving you an overview of the concept of why BEE legislation. Overall, in a nutshell, biggest factor is to look at economic growth. We are trying to get as many people into the economy in terms of working, starting their business, being a part of that bigger picture. And then looking at the legislative component, we've got quite a number of pieces of legislation under BEE. First one, the BEE Act was promulgated firstly in 2003, and an amendment took place in 2013. The Act looks at the structure of broad-based Black economic empowerment. Key definitions are listed in the Act, as well as it lists out the functions of the BBBEE Commission, and also the powers of the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. What can the minister do from a BEE perspective, or outlined in the Act itself? What administrates the BEE Act? We've got the BEE regulations. So any sort of process that is involved within the BEE Act, there's an actual administration of that, and there's a step-by-step guideline or procedure that needs to be followed. And this is then listed out in the actual BEE regulations. Our threshold for major BE transactions, this looks at all ownership transactions in the excess of 25 million Rand or more in terms of Rand value would need to be then registered with the BEE Commission. So that is a gazette that was released by the Minister in 2017, indicating to the market that if you are going to embark on this journey of an ownership transaction, depending on the value, you'd need to then lodge it and register it with the BEE Commission. Your amendment BEE Codes of Good Practice. Now, that is the framework of measurement. So this is the actual document that indicates how entities get verified or how entities score their different points across the scorecard. And that obviously includes all of the targets, the point weightings, as well as the methodologies and principles that needs to be followed. Your sector codes of good practice. You've got different sectors that have their own BEE code of good practice in terms of their principles, their targets, their point weightings, and that is used by those sectors that fall under that particular industry. We currently have about 11 BEE sector codes out there. So for those entities that fall under sector code, would apply that sector code in terms of their BEE verification. 2008 verification manual as well as 2015 draft verification manual. These documents look at how the BEE verification industry operates and how they conduct themselves from an evidence perspective. So the process of verification, looks at an audit trail. It looks at a piece of evidence that indicates that you've implemented a certain initiative. Then you'll obviously be able to award the points for that initiative. So that document covers the areas of evidence requirements as well as documentary requirements. Statement 005 of 2011, as well as the draft statement, that just looks at ways of regulating the verification space. So that those are your BEE rating agencies. We've got the Yes Initiative Gazette Practice Note and Clarification Statement, something that I hold very close to myself in terms of the Youth Employment Service Initiative, where it looks at how best we can incorporate and amalgamate BEE with addressing unemployment for youth in South Africa. So something that I would want to see, more and more companies joining and being a part of this initiative. Amendment statement 000-300-400 in Schedule 1. Some brief amendments were made in 2019 to the General Code of Good Practice, and they were just tweaking of certain clauses and provisions. One of the big changes that came through in 2019 was the bursary provision. So there's an emphasis and a focus on providing, support for Black students in terms of higher education bursaries. And we've got our practice note for collective enterprises that was released by the Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition last year in May, just governing the rules around ownership structures such as your broad-based ownership schemes, trust, as well as your employee share ownership schemes. All right, institutions, we've got 5 different institutions that are quite heavily involved in the BEE sphere. We've got the BBBEE Policy Unit, which is through the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. This is the institution, as well as through the Minister, that actually gazettes pieces of legislation pertaining to BEE. Part of the DTIC, but not part of the BEE Policy Unit. We've got the BEE Commission. Main functions are to look into the state of transformation and report the state of transformation on an annual basis, as well as to investigate fronting practices or complaints in terms of fronting practices. The BEE Commission is playing that role in respect of ensuring that the application of the legislation is taking place, but also that there's no fronting practices taking place in terms of how entities implement the initiatives. We've got the BEE Advisory Council. Earlier this year, the President has appointed a new BEE Advisory Council to advise government in respect of transformation, as well as broad-based Black economic empowerment. We've got our sector codes of good practice councils. These are the councils that drive and develop the BEE sector codes of good practice in conjunction with the DTIC. And then we've got SANAS, the South African National Accreditation System, that is going to regulate the BEE rating agencies and their conduct, making sure that when they issue out these BEE certificates, the results are accurate, they are according to the actual legislation. Right? So just putting it back to the Act, definition of Black people, something to always keep at the back of your mind. South Africa being quite a diverse country already, when it comes to beneficiaries of broad-based Black economic empowerment, relates to Black people, which means African, colors, and Indians, who are citizens of the Republic of South Africa by birth or descent, or who became citizens of the Republic of South Africa by naturalization, before 27 April 1994 or on or after 27 April 1994, and who would have been entitled to acquire citizenship by naturalization prior to that date. So very, very important to just make sure that when you're looking at different initiatives for broad-based Black economic empowerment, you do consider the definition of beneficiaries that is stated under the Act. All right. So a quick overview of the general BEE scorecard and the scorecard of how it all comes together. So the approach that we have in BEE legislation is a balanced scorecard approach, meaning that there are different elements, different points of weighting that total up to then achieve an overall BEE status level. We've got 5 different elements under the general BEE scorecard. We've got ownership, management control, skills development, ESD, which is your enterprise and supply development, which incorporates preferential procurement as well, and socioeconomic development. If we look at the point weightings, ownership sits at 25, management control sitting at 19, skills development has 20 points plus 5 additional bonus points. ESD is the largest element of the scorecard, as we can see, sitting at 42 points plus your 4 bonus points. And then we've got socioeconomic development sitting at 5 points. Overall, we've got a total of 120 points on the BEE scorecard, and that is, also beyond the 100-point mark in terms of the different levels. So with the bonus points, with additional points on the different elements, it is exceeding, beyond that 100-point mark. Certain priority elements on the scorecard is ownership, skills development, and ESD. Certain sub-minimums need to be met. But how it all comes together, you've got your different BEE status levels from level 1 up until 8. Anything that is below level 8 would be non-compliant. So when you go through this process of adhering to the different point indicators and implementing initiatives, you then come up with a total score. That total score gets allocated to a certain level bracket, and that would be your level itself. Your recognition level in terms of percentage, which is quite important for who you're going to be dealing with from a procurement perspective, they would want to see you at least being a level 4 or even higher, because when they spend money with you on their BEE scorecard, they'll be recognizing the full value. So level 4 is recognizing that 100% value. Anything beyond level 4 is obviously beneficial. You're recognizing more than what you'd normally spend. Anything less than that, starting to question, should we actually still be spending here? Because from a BEE perspective, we are not actually reaping the benefits. Okay. Now, the important concept that I want to share with all of our attendees today is this component of transactional versus transformational BEE. So if we look at this aspect of transactional, this only focuses on the points. So no supporting of the notion of transformation is being considered. Now, when we talk about transformational, we look at a simple definition, which is a complete change in the appearance or character of something or someone, considering what the transformed economy is or business needs to look like, and what will actually support this. How can we go about then actually creating a change, having an impact? What we do is that we use the BEE scorecard as a benchmark of transformation, as opposed to just being an end, as opposed to just looking at the points, looking at what I need to spend from a scorecard perspective, and then stop there. The points will definitely follow when you are implementing your transformational initiatives. As BEE is a piece of legislation out there, and this regulates the space through the codes of good practice, you need to consider both of these aspects. You cannot have, just transformational without transactional, because at the same time, you are going to be measured on the different scorecards, as well as the targets and the point weightings. All right. So when we look at this concept of transactional, and from my experience, a lot of entities, ask these types of questions. They start off asking the question around, how much do we have to spend to get the points? What are the cheapest points available? How do we claim the points? So that's having that transactional approach in terms of how you approach your BEE transformation journey. Now, if you flip that switch and look at it from a transformational perspective, and you'll start asking the questions around, what do we have to change to get the points sustainably? How does this impact our business? How can we use the BEE scorecard to optimize performance and productivity? Now, those are really key questions to be asking the business when looking at it from a transformational perspective. And what I've always have had discussions with our members is about when you're aligning your business strategy and your BE strategy, these should be talking to each other. You should not have separate strategies where BE is running on one side and then you've got your business strategies running on the other side that do not connect or even talk to each other. You are bound to fail on one of them. So it's very important to see how best, as your entity operating in the industry that you are, how can you best leverage up the BE legislation to, one, meet the requirements from a scorecard perspective, but two, also look at ways as how is my business going to actually, thrive in this environment? How can I enter into new markets within leveraging of the BE legislation? And once you are amalgamating those two strategies, you find yourself will be actually succeeding in respect of the business side and also the transformation side. Okay. A few barriers and drivers to transformation. And if we look at it as an overall organization. We first have the board. The board of an organization could be a barrier or even a driver to transformation. Then we've got our top management individuals that are working on a daily basis in the enterprise and moving forward in terms of what needs to be done. Then we've got line management as well as employees. So amongst all of these four categories, there's always going to be either a barrier or driver within transformation. And this even goes down to the simple sort of decisions that are being made internally. For example, choosing a particular supplier to use for a particular product that you're going to be purchasing. That type of decision might be even a driver towards transformation or even a barrier when looking at the bigger picture. So all individuals within an organization play some sort of role in terms of driving transformation in South Africa. What we also share with our members quite frequently is about adopting a certain culture and driving a culture of transformation internally is where you'll find yourself most likely to succeed. Continuously talking about the topic of transformation, as well as the importance of it, not for only ourselves as an enterprise, but also for the bigger South African context. Some benefits of BEE, preferential procurement purposes, that looks at, how you are going to be submitting your BEE status amongst your customers. It's definitely one of those areas where, even in the private sector, you would be able to pronounce on a certain level. If you don't meet that level, you can't do actually business with those entities, or even from a state perspective, BEE is one of those requirements when it comes to tenders. Transform society, looking at how best we as a country can be transformed, equality on all levels and just access to economic activities is one of the key areas that also looks at how there is a benefit for BEE. To some degree, as time goes by, we're finding that your BEE status is becoming more and more of a commodity, as in order to conduct business in South Africa, your BEE status is becoming highly important, as well as assisting government in achieving transformational goals in South Africa, as well as the last point here, marketing and branding. A lot of the organizations, once they receive the BEE status, they definitely want to ensure that they put the messaging out there. They are good corporate citizens of South Africa, and it does go quite a long way in terms of how those messages have been received. All right, Sharon, I see you've come off your video, or your video feed is on, so I am done from my side. I think I'm just on time, I think.
So thanks very much, Sunil. I found that extremely interesting and informative. I'm going to ask Bruce Lennon, who is CEO of Stumela Group, who's got more than 25 years of experience in maritime industry and 22 years of business, plus in the BEE sector. He has the ability to apply legal and the BEE skills and knowledge and implement positive, cost-effective solutions for clients. So it's somebody who is actually a practitioner who takes what Sunil and his teams in the past have put together, what the chamber does as advisory, and here you get somebody who now actually looks at the practical implications, how to actually hold a business's hand to ensure that when they actually do apply it, they do it sensibly, they do it appropriately, they do it in alignment to the business plan, the business strategy, the goals of the company, and also the size of the business, and not gold plating things and keeping everything from a positive business perspective. Is the business doing things better at the end of the engagement with Bruce? So Bruce is going to spend a few moments just asking Sunil a couple of questions around key issues that he would like to cover. And then we'll come back shortly for a plenary session where I'll be chatting to both of the panelists. Could I hand over to you, please, Bruce?
Thanks, Sharon. And thank you, Neil. That was a really informative presentation. And I share everything that you put forward. You can clearly see it's very, very complex. One has to take into a host of factors, legislation, the various bodies regulating BEE, and then as a company, actually try and score as many points as you can on the scorecard. So, a couple of quick points from my side that I'd like to just raise and get your input, given that you have been involved actively with policy and legislation and interpretation thereof in the past. The turnover thresholds relating to exempted micro enterprises 10 million, qualifying small enterprises 50 million, and generics over 50 million. Those haven't really been addressed or haven't taken into account inflation since 2015. So I'd just like to get your input or your feeling as to if you feel that at any stage in the near future, those thresholds will be amended to take into account things like inflation.
Yeah, when it relates to the previous regime of BEE legislation on the 2007 codes, there we had turnover thresholds that were EME 0 to 5 million, QSEs from 5 to 35 million, and then beyond 35 million was for generics. So there has been consideration for that in now the 2013 amendments, as well as it was consistently kept in legislation in 2019. And yeah, there always could be potential for that in future. The DTIC would need to consider and see, what the market is looking like at this point in time. Have entities actually increased in size of revenue? Or are they, still considered to be small within those thresholds? Currently sitting at 0 to 10, 10 to 50, as well as beyond 50. But it does make a difference, in terms of the previous 2007 codes moving into the generic codes of good practice. A lot of your QSEs that were deemed QSEs were now even EMEs under the new categorization. So there are quite a number of factors that would play a role here. And I think that where there is a need for change, looking at what's happening in the economy or what's happening in our country, the DTIC would need to come in and, look at what needs to be changed and put that out to market.
Thank you, Neil. That's very informative. The second question relates to the 2015 draft verification manual that you showed us earlier. And this is for the BE auditors themselves to know how to interpret and apply scoring when they come to your office or your company and issue your certificate. And I was just wondering why it's been in draft since 2015 and we're now sitting in 2022.
Yeah, it has been, quite a long time with this document that has been released. There's even been changes that has affected from a legislative perspective in 2019. So, in its current form, the 2015 draft verification manual is not conducive right now for the market. And I think that to some degree, with all of the legislative amendments coming into play, you don't want to change something and then we'll need to change it again if there's new legislation coming out, as we've seen with the 2019 amendments. But what I can confidently say, without even the 2015, or the current verification manual, your agencies as well as your entities can still apply, the BEE legislation. They still can actually formulate the BEE strategy. They can still actually be verified. And one of the most significant ways of interpreting BEE legislation is looking at what we're trying to achieve through the objectives. If you are going to align interpretations through, to the objectives of BEE, you can never go wrong with that. And bearing in mind that all pieces of legislation is subject to interpretation. People view things differently. People look at pieces of legislation differently. So it's not a BEE issue. It's definitely a legislative issue, which we are going to be finding that amongst different pieces of legislation.
Okay, thank you for that. And then my final question before we open to the floor is the YES program that you were involved in. It has been fairly successful. A number of my clients are applying it. I was just wondering how are you tracking those young people that have finished their 1-year work experience, which effectively the YES initiative allows them to achieve? Is there any tracking to say, I know there's a certain number that are absorbed and companies get points or they increase their level for that, But is there any tracking of those thousands of young people every year or are they just simply allowed to go off into the wilderness and you don't really know where they are? Are we tracking where they are and how they're doing?
So what's significant about the YES initiative, it was one of the first initiatives where you can see that there's a real big partnership between government and business coming through here. And the institution that has been, been appointed to manage this entire initiative from an administrative point of view is the YESVU, the NPO. So I'm sure everyone has heard about them. They've seen their marketing material, you've seen their website, all yellow and bright. And they are the institution that's out there that needs to manage the numbers. They need to obviously look at how the impact is happening on our economy, how many people are coming into the program, how many companies are participating within the program, and they play that role from an administration perspective. So there's a very close relationship between the YESVU as well as government in respect of managing this entire initiative to then measure the impact, which I think is really, really important.
Resilience, I think, is the word that we all have to have, which is something you have to give South Africa and its population an absolute credit for. It's probably one of the more resilient nations in the world in terms of always finding the silver lining and getting on and getting stuff done. And what I see in this Black empowerment issues, the employment issues, the education issues, where private sector and people with a passion are actually making such a big difference in South Africa. First question I'd like to ask, if I may, of you, Bruce. If you look at your day job and the number of companies you come into contact with, the number of people that you socialize with, your network, on the ground, what is the appetite towards the fact we've had BEE since I can remember, and that's a long time. We've always had these initiatives, so we're talking sort of 30 plus years. What is the attitude to it now? It's a good thing, it's a necessity, it's past its sell-by date, do I really have to? How would you describe the various polars and attitudes of business? And maybe there's a strata of company size or company ownership that gives you these different clues?
Thanks, Sharon. That's a very, very good question. I've been involved in BEE since 2007, and I always joke and say that I didn't choose BEE, it basically chose me. But yes, definitely since 2007 up until now, there has been a galvanizing energy, a focus on BEE, particularly the areas of skills development, employment equity, procurement, and enterprise and supplier development. Those areas, the companies that I work with, none of them seem to have a problem. Yes, there are financial limitations when the training targets 100 million or so on, whatever, relative to your size of your payroll. But yes, there is an appetite for it. Although I do constantly get the question from my clients, when will BEE end? And I don't have that answer, and I don't think it will end in the next 10 to 15 years. As Neil's pointed out, and Arlene's video earlier, there's still a long way to go, particularly with relation to employment. However, the initiatives such as enterprise and supplier development are clearly creating sustainable entities which themselves are now employing people. So in a way that will assist. And education is the key. So my biggest focus with my clients is generally on skills development. And there's a number of positive benefits there. One is that employees are trained, can move up through the management levels, obviously assist the company itself, but equally helping train and educate school leavers. It gives them a better chance than maybe their parents had to either find a job in the workforce or ultimately create their own employment, their own companies. So yes, by a large degree, there is an appetite for BEE, particularly the positive areas.
Thank you very much for that. And I'm not sure who will be the best person to answer this question, maybe both of you. But first, can I just say thanks very much for the questions that are coming in. I'm taking comments from them in terms of the questions I'm going to ask. But if there are any more, please keep them going. I do appreciate them. Question I'd like to ask here on behalf of the audience is, as a business, you are new foreign investment, new startup, whatever it is you're looking to do work for governments, but you have a requirement for a BEE at a more mature level than the smaller companies might need. But if you're at that more mature level, you've either got an opportunity of getting a BEE organization to buy some of the equity in the company, or you can partner with a MPO or something like that, where there's actually making a difference on the ground to people, employment, education, feeding, those kind of things. What causes a company to make the choice one way or the other of how it matches its scorecard requirements? Maybe you'd like to go first, Bruce, and then we'll take it to you, Neil, afterwards.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Sharon. At the end of the day, if we look at the ownership perspective, selling of shares to a third party, bringing them in, most entities will look to what positive benefits can the prospective shareholder bring, i.e. do they have access to markets or access to additional clients and so on? What internal value will they bring to the board, to management and so on? So that's one perspective that companies look at. Others, and some of the bigger multinationals have rather gone down the charitable route, where they've partnered with an NPO or a non-profit organization or entity where the beneficiaries are Black, and as a result, the ownership flows through from that perspective. There was, and Neil will back me up on this, there was some debate and robust discussion between the BEE Commissioner and the Minister of the DTI as to these type of NPO strategies, and the BEE Commissioner didn't like them and had made certain statements. And last year in May, the Minister of the DTI put out a clarification notice, which effectively said those type of structures are in the codes and they are still valid, notwithstanding what the BEE Commissioner has said. So yes, at the end of the day, it's really what is the individual organization who is now bringing on Black shareholders, what are they trying to achieve from that combination of shares of different shareholders?
You, Neil, is there any complement to that you would like to add or comment to add to that one?
Yeah, just to add on to what Bruce has mentioned, you need to identify what's feasible for this business within the industry that they're operating in. And for example, Bruce did touch on the charitable, sort of ownership initiatives. Now, if you have to look at an ESOP, an employee share ownership scheme within an organization, you are bringing on the shareholder through a vehicle which will now own a portion of the business. But you need to look at the bigger picture of this. What is it going to do for employee culture? What is it going to be for employee, development within the organization? That looks at how we will then, as a business, be able to support our employees being a part of such an ownership structure. Similar to the mining industry, broad-based ownership schemes, part of the ownership within those entities. Mining entities will be mining in a certain area. Communities will be part of the ownership of that business during that period, and that all adds value to that overall business. So again, boiling it down to the industry, the business model, and what will be most feasible.
Thank you very much for that, Neil. Just a quick, simple technical question. Can skills development spend support PDI's attendance at a fee-paying school? Neil, do you have a response to that?
It would depend. The word school was used in the question, and we've got a skills development matrix that describes the different categories of training. So one would need to make sure that from a BE perspective, if you're going to be claiming any sort of training initiative, it definitely aligns to the skills development matrix that consists of bursaries, learnerships, internships, apprenticeships, as well as informal training. And it's also important to know that when we use certain terminologies in the BEE space, we can't just use the term thinking about it in the literal form. There's always going to be a definition or concept attached to that. And the most common one we find with our members is the concept of intern. So somebody will say that they've got an internship, and you ask them, is this internship or intern meeting the requirements as the BEE skills development matrix? And the answer is no, because from a BE perspective, an internship leads to an end qualification. What sometimes our members refer to as just a person working for a period of 12 months or 18 months, and refer to them by the title of intern. So very important to also understand terminologies and concepts from a BE perspective.
Thank you for that. And you helped me understand a few things there in the process too. Another question is, do you think the efforts that have been made over the past decades in the Black empowerment space, in the different legislations that have been developed, have we sufficiently supported the development of the SME sector, the Black-owned SME sector, and have we created a support to economic growth and improvement in people's way of life, financial position? Have we got some way of measuring? Has there been a tangible improvement, or is this just making us feel good still? Do you want to maybe answer that first, Bruce, and then we'll go to you, Neil?
Sure, thanks, Sharon. That's a really wide question, and I can only deal with it subjectively from my own personal experience. I'm not aware of any national measurement yardstick or criteria applied to that. So Neil might be a little bit more able to discuss that. But I can speak personally from the various companies that we work with. We work from EMEs, little companies, right up to multinationals, and everything in between. And in my opinion, since 2007, Black people employed in companies have definitely benefited in a number of ways, particularly skills development. In the management control area, there's a deliberate focus on improving Black people's lives, and so on. And yes, on the enterprise and supplier development area, there's been massive strides there that I have seen personally, and it's been quite gratifying to watch some small little Black entities grow into sizable organizations. Some actually have now exceeded the QSE level. In other words, their revenue is greater than 50 million. They themselves are employing people. They themselves, in this particular instance, have 100 trucks now running around the country, transporting containers and so on. That's really, from my personal perspective, I've seen massive strides. How one can actually quantify it, I don't have that answer. Perhaps Neil can elaborate a bit more on that.
Thanks for that, Bruce. Yeah, there have been a few reports even released this year, on the state of transformation. Earlier this year, we saw the Sanlam Ghosh report being released. We've seen the BEE Commission National Trends and Status of Transformation report also being released. There's different parameters in terms of how this is being measured, cuts across the different elements, the levels, what was the value that was contributed to the elements across the scorecard as a collective, as a country. I think that those reports start to give a bit of a picture in terms of how we are making progress, but also slightly limiting, depending on the sample size that was used in those reports. But one thing I can perhaps share with our attendees today is we have been making progress, but I believe that it's not still in a sustainable manner. It's not being thought about going further than just the initiative. So one of the key aspects that we also discuss with our members is don't implement initiatives for the sake of implementing initiatives without a long-term view on this. What you're starting, and this is now from an ESG perspective, what you're starting to create is a dependency relationship. What you're then going to introduce is, you find your ED beneficiary year on year, you're going to be supporting this ED beneficiary, and you find that this ED beneficiary starts to build their business model around the support. So meaning that next year I'm going to get an initiative, the following year I'll get an initiative, the third year I'll get an initiative. And if the business pulls that initiative away from this beneficiary, that ED beneficiary business falls. So that's creating not a sustainable solution, but looking at a way of being this ED beneficiary being dependent on this vision entity. So definitely to consider sustainability.
Last question I'd like to ask, and this also depends on the size of the business and maybe potentially the industry of the business and its appetite. But in the BBEE, I get you use so many different terms, guys, as to which one it is, but in the Black Empowerment Transformation Journey, how are people monitoring their own transformation through that journey? And is there an appetite to do it, or is it just, okay, we've ticked a box at the beginning and we forget to do anything thereafter? And are there some businesses that are actually really positively engaging in this monitoring and constant internal improvement of the transformation journey? Bruce, would you like to give us some input first?
Thanks, Sharon. Yes, companies are monitoring very aggressively and actively and positively. Each year, you're required to have a BEE audit done if you would wish, in order for your BEE certificate to be renewed. It's based on your most recent completed financial year, although there was recently a case law on that, and we won't go down that road just now. But effectively, yes, there are, and all the clients that we work with are at least trying to maintain their existing level. The majority are trying to improve on those levels year on year. As they get more familiar with BEE, become more comfortable with it, as they interact the transactional and the transformation combination that Neil spoke about, and are embracing BEE. The companies that are successful from my personal perspective are the ones that actually embrace BEE and don't do it as a grudge buy. Each year their certificate expires. Each year their customers ask them for their renewed certificate. So it's a very clever piece of legislation in the sense that it's self-policing. Your customer asks you for your BEE certificate. So you ask your supplier because you need it for procurement and so on. It's almost a self-regulating mechanism, and companies are definitely, the majority that we work with in particular, are definitely embracing it and trying to improve every year, or at least maintain where they are.
I think one of the most important aspects where, entities would want to have an impact from a transformation perspective is to start changing the mindset of individuals. Individuals run businesses, individuals bring change, individuals make decisions. Now, if you're going to go down the road of, adhering to your transformation journey or implementing your transformation journey, individuals are going to be the ones that are going to be making those decisions, in terms of transformation. Yes, you need to strike a good balance in terms of how you run your business. You don't want to allow the legislation to take over your entire business. You need to strike a good balance. You need to see what's feasible. You need to see what is going to be practical for businesses to implement. But if you can get that balance down correctly, you'll see on the BEE front, the transformations and your business side, you are definitely bound to thrive. So that's just all I wanted to add on that point, just the mindset in terms of that monitoring and progress of transformation.
Thank you very much, Janelle. I appreciate the input. And if we could just have a closing single statement or two from each of our panelists. We've got about 90 seconds to the official end of our time.
Thanks, Sharon. Yes, I would like to say embrace the codes, understand them, implement them in the right spirit. That's it.
You, Neil?
Yeah, I think I share the same sentiments. Embrace them, understand the codes, implement them. But most importantly, I would say, look at the bigger picture for South Africa. Look at how we want to grow our economy. Look at how we want to create value for our people in our country. I think that is super important, the bigger picture.
And I think that is probably one of the strongest messages we could leave us with, is the importance that the economy is going to be the beneficiary. The people of South Africa are going to be the beneficiaries. Efficient business, upskilling, changing the demographics of our country from a income strata point of view. And it definitely will make a difference to the sustainability of the country broadly, because we are so reliant on big business rather than on a much broader income earning base for the country. So we support it from every perspective, other than over gold plating it, we don't support. But we do support those initiatives that are actually going to make a difference to the people on the ground, which is what is the focus and purpose of the South African Chamber. So I'd like to thank, most importantly, our panelists who've been fantastic today in informing us and giving us practical insights as well. For those of you that are answering the poll, thank you very much. Not everybody's got started, so we'll leave you open for a couple more minutes to see if we can get a few more answers in. And I'd like to thank my panel very, very much. I really appreciate the insights that you've shared with us, and to the Black Empowerment Chamber. Thank you very much for the shared initiative.